Welcome into the Bobby Carpenter Show with my man, Anthony Schlegel. It is a Tuesday. It's a bloody Tuesday. Schleg's coming off a bye week. Apologize for no show yesterday. We had some technical difficulties, did one, and you know what, Schleg's disappeared. Poof, David Copperfield, as you always say. So
good, man. So many nuggets.
It was.
So many nuggets in there.
And we had Lathan on. Lathan did a great job. So we'll try to reproduce the quality of show that we did for you yesterday, throw some more nuggets in there for you. We're going to have Bill Bender on today, which is tremendous because he's got an unbelievable scenario that, I mean, Schlegs, it's like a mind blow right there. You have no idea what exactly is going to happen should it get to this point. And this is what happens when you have like massive conferences. But coming off of a bye week, Schlegs, Buckeyes taking on Nebraska this week. Big noon kick. They're going to honor the 2014 national championship team. Urban's going to be in the house. A lot of the former players, guys who still aren't playing, will be there. So pretty exciting environment for everybody. Pretty big environment. Nebraska unranked, but 5-2 coming in as well. So a lot of juice that should be had for this game.
I wish it had more juice because we thought Nebraska was on the come up, and then we saw the reality that Indiana is pretty damn good and beat the brakes off them at home 56-7. Indiana is a complete football team. I like where they're headed. It shows how you can do the portal culture. Coaching football still matters in today's college football. And again, the show yesterday, it was epic, but we'll just touch on it. We had a lot of teams that everybody thought was going to win that did not win. Alabama being one of them. Texas. I mean, what Kirby Smart did and what he talked about after that game, these guys came in, they wanted to eat. It was intent. Like, what was the intent?
Eat. They're about that life.
And they definitely took it to – and I love social media, not for the – some of the banter's fine, but I love the memes that go into our vanilla nut tap conversation. But some of the things that will roll up on your feed where it was like, I don't know what movie it was from, but like Texas and OU, like calling the Big 12, like we made a huge mistake. Like, can we come back? Stuff like that. It was funny. But that's why you have college football. That's why you love it. And then to your point, Bob, honoring the 2014 national championship team that lost to Vatech at home, shouldn't have lost. But through those, and Kirby mentioned this, like when you go through and you have a loss, you can get some guys' attention and clean some things up that could potentially not be addressed in the manner in which you would have should you have had a win. And I'm anxious to see, like, this game is big for me, and I'm anxious to see the corrections that were made going into a real test at Penn State on November 2nd.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit more later. But, like, sometimes the wins, like the close wins, they're great because you can learn from them, but it's not as painful of a learning tool. And now in this 12-team playoff era, you can suffer the loss. It can still be painful. It can force you to peel back the layers. I mean, sometimes, Schlegs, I think in medicine they call it debris. You got to debris the wound a little bit. You got to go in and cut out some of the dead parts of skin, maybe even a little bit of the live parts to kind of get that thing healed up and get it going. And as opposed to just keep putting that salve on it, put a little tussin on it, wrap that thing up and keep rolling. And so I think that this forced the Ohio State Buckeyes to take a look in there, debris it a little bit, understand what's going on. Because as we look around college football, I mean, there was a lot of crap. We'll get into all that stuff with Bill Bender. But there was a number of teams that lost that you didn't think. Miami has continued to survive and advance. And there was something to that. I had someone tell me that they remind them of the 2002 Buckeye team. I'm like, well, if the 2002 Buckeye team didn't play defense and only played offense, then maybe. And if they somehow are reviewing things and, you got to get a little bit lucky sometimes. But Miami seems to have like a lot of luck in their back pocket. Like, they may have a rabbit's foot shoved up their rear, maybe swallowed a horseshoe. I don't know, but they seem to get it done and take care of that. But we're going to get into all these different games. But the reality is, like, I think now with the last of like the major unbeatens, yes, Indiana is unbeaten. We know that. BYU, Iowa State, Miami still unbeaten. But really, when you start talking about Ohio State, Georgia, Bama, Oregon, Texas, like these guys have all lost. And that's really kind of where it is in the Big Ten and SEC. I mean, Oregon's still undefeated, rather. They're still rolling out there, but they're still going to have to play somebody in the Big Ten championship again. And so the ability to just run the table without losing a game is going to be incredibly difficult, especially in the Big Ten and in the SEC. Penn State's still undefeated, but Penn State still has to play Ohio State. So they've still got a full day's work and a Big Ten championship game. And so as these teams kind of evolve through this process, you're looking around and trying to figure out, who are the best, who the best of the best are, Schlegs, Top Gun. Think your name's going to be on that trophy? Oh, there's 2 O's in Goose. So we'll see kind of where all this goes. And speaking of Top Gun, stick around because later in the show, we'll pull out some of the great images. AJ Hawk had a big bash, does a big fundraiser for the Buckeye Cruise and James Cancer Hospital. This year was, normally it's in the summer. This year was last weekend. Halloween theme. Decorations were phenomenal. Costumes were tremendous. Cousin Schlegel Eddie was looking really good. Maybe a little Maverick Top Gun action slide in there. So there was a lot of great stuff. So stay with us through that. But this Ohio State team, Schleg's like, curious to get your opinion. What the pass rush was probably the thing that they needed to work on the most. And a lot of people have talked about this, finding a way to get pressure on the quarterback. And we'll get into this a little bit later. But before we get to Bill Bender, I want to give you about a minute and a half to kind of lean in on the pass rush, not even pass rush, just the pressuring of the quarterback and how that ultimately looks and what you think the best methodology is going forward. Because after you watch that Georgia-Texas game, everybody saw that and you're like, wow, Quinn Ewers is spitting blood out the side of his mouth. They're bringing 3, they're bringing 4, they're bringing 5, they're bringing 6. It looks like 3, it's 5. It looks like 5, it's 3. Looks like 4, maybe it is 4 sometimes. They're sitting there like, where'd he go? Where'd who go? They're trying to figure out what's going on. And so the pressure element, with however that looks, impacting the quarterback, affecting that guy, how that plays in the big plays, and people getting comfortable then in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and we saw in that game, and it's also why Ryan Day spent a majority of his time. It was, reported that he spent a majority of his time this week in the defensive room because that was not good enough, and they know there's some holes there. And why is that, right? Like, you got to get in the weeds of that, and he's now able to do that because Tips run the offense. And I would say this, to your point, Bob, 2-man pressure ain't going to get it done. Where are you bringing it? Like, you just got to bring it. And sometimes you're not getting there with 4. You might have to add in somebody. The biggest thing is when we had great pass rushes, that's why our corners were outstanding because they had to get the ball out of there. Oregon did some things in this game going vertical that we hadn't seen all year. So, like, you know what? We're going to test that. They did. They made plays. And so that being said, Georgia had 7 sacks in this game. You can bring pressure with 4 in a variety of different things and also have a guy spying the quarterback that adds in. We call that dead dog. But he's going to pick it when he chooses. He does that. But now you added a rusher that doesn't need to be there necessarily in man coverage underneath. You can still play 2 over and man under. You can do certain these things or zone pressure blitzes, man match people in a zone. There's a lot of different things that you can do to apply pressure. The number one thing that you got to be able to do is just play fast and violent. And I think that's what people wanted to see. That's what people saw in Georgia. Does Ohio State have the same characteristics defensively? 100%. They can do those things. They got to figure out how they do it. I will say this, lining up in wide nines and being able to pressure the quarterback with now linebackers have to be able to come up and make an open field tackle at the line of scrimmage ain't going to get it done. You got to know what kind of men that you have on your line. You got to be able to rotate some of those guys, and you got to be able to, number one, affect the quarterback, and that's the mission of all defenses across college football.
Absolutely. We used to have it. You'd have a little
every day, every week. It was that guy.
Well, we have that picture in our locker, Schlegs, and it would say, affect this guy. And it would be the quarterback of the week, the soup du jour, the quarterback du jour, if you will, and figuring out who that guy is, how you're going to impact him. And that was what the entire stopping the run and affecting the quarterback was what the game plan was built around. And I had a great conversation with Adam Rittenberg talking about that and maybe some of the elements of how that can happen and why the fourth quarter for Ohio State, both offensively and defensively, but focusing on the defensive side, hasn't maybe been what people have wanted it to be over the last couple of years. So we'll get into all of that stuff coming up. Before we get out of here, we got Bill Bender coming up next. I want to remind everybody, XSport mouth guards, attention, adults, parents, protect what matters most with XSport mouth guards, trusted by professional athletes, designed by NHL team dentists. They're the ones that would know. XSport guards are scientifically tested and proven to absorb high-impact hits, protecting both your mouth and your brain. XSport guards feature 3 layers of advanced protection, a patented carbon fiber. They 3D print that son of a gun right into your grill. It's going to feel like a glove for better protection, better performance, max comfort, clear communication. It's all right there. Focus on the game, not on your gear. Don't take chances with your safety. XSportGuards.com/Bobby. You save 15% on this fine piece of equipment. Football, hockey, lacrosse, basketball, all your sports. Volleyball, I don't care what it is, softball, get that thing in there, protect what matters most. Bill Bender of the Sporting News coming up next.
We were called soft last year. You don't want to be soft, especially when you come to the playoffs. So that's going to be a process throughout this season of establishing us as a harder team here in the
Kentucky Derby. As Authentic takes them around the far turn, 'tis the Laws making his move now, and they're into the stretch. These two stride for stride. Authentic, 'tis the Law. Here's the wire. Authentic has won the Kentucky
I don't buy into this nonsense, this conspiracy nonsense that he's got his money and he's dogging it. That's ridiculous.
Welcome back into the show. And now on Tuesdays are for Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Make sure you give him a follow on X at Bill Bender 92. His favorite player, Reggie White, growing up. And Bill's got this unbelievable, well, it's unbelievable, really more of a terrible situation that could happen in the Big Ten that we're going to break down and get to in a little bit, because in these massive conferences now, Bill, I don't know what the tiebreakers look like at the end of it. I think they're just putting a Plinko board up there and seeing how it falls. That may be the best thing that they have going. But, college football, as we always say, it never fails to deliver big games all throughout the day. And it was kind of nice not having Ohio State play, because then I didn't have to nervous watch any game. I could just sit back, consume what I wanted, let the day take me where I wanted. And there were great games in every window, from starting at noon, 3:30, and then to the evening. What was the game to you that kind of drew you in the most?
Well, in that early window, it was Indiana, to be honest with you. The way that they took advantage of every Nebraska turnover, they looked like a team that would actually make it interesting in Columbus and not just a brush-off game that the Buckeyes would win. And they, in spots, looked like the second best team in the Big Ten with Curtis Rourke on the field. And then he gets hurt, and Taven Jackson comes in, and that tempers some expectations. Maybe he gets back by the Michigan State game, but it looked very for real to me. And I was watching that opposite of that Miami-Louisville game you guys mentioned in the last segment, where I don't think Miami reminds me of you guys in 2002. They remind me of like an elite offense that can score 50 points on anybody, but they have some problems on defense. And that will catch up with you, if not in an ACC game against a Clemson or a Pitt or an SMU in the college football playoff. But Cam Ward is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how similar in different areas, like even Miami, right? They've allowed 117 points over the last 2 weeks. They're outscoring everybody. They had a fumble return for a touchdown that got reversed. They end up winning these close games, which again, just win, right? And then you got Tennessee at home. They were a juggernaut offensively. Now they haven't scored a point in 3 games in the first half, and then they go out and they beat Alabama at home, and then all the chaos that ensues. Why is that happening? Because I think sometimes college sports fans have this unrealistic expectation, like from the NFL, and we just think that these guys are going to be able to deliver week in and week out. And we're not seeing that considering the fact that there's only a few remaining undefeateds within the conference.
Yeah, I think the SEC and the Big Ten are two just completely different kinds of races. The SEC reminds me a little bit of maybe the NFC, where there's a bunch of teams with 2 losses or less, and I'm not quite sure who the best team is. I mean, Georgia in this case would be like the Detroit Lions, where you think they're the Super Bowl contender, but they have to go through some good teams like Minnesota. That was close. Green Bay. Same deal in the SEC. It was Georgia's turn. Georgia had the big game against Texas. Just we talked about that on here last week, where they got the underdog card. And how many times did Kirby Smart deal the underdog card? 1.1 yards rushing for Texas per carry. You're not going to beat anybody at any level. And I know all our boys have played and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to win a 4th grade game with 1.1 yards per carry, right? So that was the thing there. And then the Big Ten, the travel factors in. The matchups factor in. I do think there's an upper tier of those teams that I mentioned and what we're going to talk about with this doomsday scenario. But Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State have kind of established themselves as the big 3 this year.
So let's travel back to that Indiana-Nebraska game. And Bill, I'm going to be honest, that was as surprising as anything. I thought if Indiana was going to win it, it would have been maybe a 7-point. I think the line was about 6.5. I thought even maybe Nebraska covers, and it's a 27, 24, 31, 28, 31, 27 game type like that. But Indiana went out there and blew the doors off. And even after Curtis Rourke goes out, Taven Jackson comes in and they're still scoring. Like, it felt like Simonetti was trying to drive it home that I know this is Nebraska. Nebraska had been good up front all year. I thought they would have an advantage on the line, but Indiana, like, Bill, if you squinted, it looked like with those jerseys, like they looked like Alabama from about 3 or 4 years ago.
For sure. They played fast on defense. They took advantage of every Nebraska turnover. They run the football. I mean, I mentioned Rourke and the receivers earlier, but they run the football so well with Ellison and Lawson, a tag team. He brought all these transfers from James Madison. I'll throw a comparison at you. He reminds me a little bit of when Joe Tiller came to the Big Ten at Purdue.
Yeah.
And the other Big Ten coaches, it's a pretty buttoned up league, but they're not used to a guy like him. And Joe Tiller, I remember he came in and within a few years, Drew Brees, and it was something the Big Ten hasn't seen. And Curt Cignetti has some qualities about him like that, where when you see him at Assembly Hall call out Michigan and Ohio State, you kind of roll your eyes and say, I mean, come on, man, you haven't beat Ohio State since the 80s. You haven't, beat Michigan and Ann Arbor forever. And yet those possibilities are out there for this team this year. And if they can get by Washington without Rourke and beat Michigan, they'll have a compelling playoff case no matter what happens in Columbus.
So 11-1. I mean, are you a believer that they make it into the playoff? Because I can't imagine them not, with especially how they've looked and how impressive they've been, to people publicly.
Oh, for sure. I think they would get in at that point. They would give the Big Ten, if it shakes out how I think it might shake out, the Big Ten would have a really good case for 4 playoff teams in Ohio State, where they're sitting in their schedule. Oregon, this scenario assumes that Ohio State beats Indiana, which I think will happen. Oregon, whose schedules open up. If Oregon beats Illinois this weekend, they are 21.5 point favorites. So I think they'll take care of business there. They've got a pretty straight look to Indianapolis, which makes Penn State, Ohio State the next mega matchup, the next top 5 matchup we're going to see in college football, and there'll be fallout from there. But those are the 4 teams to keep an eye on. They can get in the playoff. And how do we measure that against this SEC mess we just talked about? I'll give you guys a question. I'll throw one at you. 11-1 Indiana or 10-2 Alabama. What will they do versus what should they do?
Ooh, that's tough. I guess the question will become, and it's going to come down a little bit to the eye test, because you're telling me Alabama goes 10-2. That means they're beating LSU in Death Valley. Oklahoma isn't obviously very great, but they're handling Missouri this weekend. So a little bit of that, Bill, is going to come down to feel. Like, if Indiana loses a close one to Ohio State and they go up there, and I know that Michigan isn't as good as what they've been, but we still, we cheer for the laundry. The helmet is the same helmet as the national champions last year. And if they somehow beat Michigan by 21 or 28 points and look really good against Ohio State, I think they have a really compelling case, because of just, I think, the belief of what they are, where Alabama's been kind of all over the place this year. I think the eye test will come into play, but they'll have I didn't think I'd ever say that a 1-loss Indiana would get in over a 2-loss Alabama, but as long as they look good, I think they would take the cake.
Right. And these 2 games against Michigan, even though Michigan is where they're at right now and very poor offensively, Indiana will be measured against that game because Michigan's still pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. And you get to see this Indiana offense that's averaging over 40 points per game, top FBS offense in the country, go up against Michigan. And then, of course, you go into Columbus, you play Ohio State. I remember the 2020 game very well where Indiana played Ohio State really tight. It was an awesome game, up and down, and Michael Penix played great. But I think this Indiana team's better than that team was. So that's what makes that defense. Yeah, they have defense and they fly around on the back end, don't they? So that makes that potential matchup very compelling to me for both teams.
And with your scenario too, like LSU, they have that 1 loss to USC, who's 3-4, which nobody would have saw that coming, especially getting beat at Maryland 29-28 in the way that happened. But now you got LSU, like let's say they lose to Alabama, they can still potentially only have 1 loss, be in a SEC championship game. Like they might just, your doomsday scenario in the Big Ten, same thing could happen. And whoever goes to that championship game, they're not getting left out. Then it's going to be, where do they rank and who do you bring in? Also, you have the ACC, potentially just a champion and a 1-loss team there. Like it's chaos, even with having 12, which I'm absolutely all about. Let's go to this one. So now you got Michigan struggling, 2 losses. Michigan State beat down Iowa. And now you got Michigan State, Michigan this week. Like, can we see 3 in a row for Michigan losing?
Yeah. I mean, Aiden Childs is playing better. I didn't anticipate Michigan State beating Iowa. And so
I didn't either.
And the Spartans always get up for the Wolverines. That really took flight with Mark D'Antonio. Ever since you look at the numbers, Michigan State, since Mark D'Antonio, it's close. And they had the advantage with him. And Jim Harbaugh, for everything he did at Michigan, he was 5-4 against Michigan State. That kind of snuck up on me this week when I looked at it. I was like, oh yeah, he didn't exactly dominate that rivalry. So there is a ton of pressure on Sharon Moore here. Michigan looked very lackluster against Illinois. The offense is so bad. Jack Tuttle, the turnovers, the quarterback plays is about as bad as it was the first year of Rich Rod. So I think there's an immense amount of pressure. Any notion of a honeymoon, that's over. This is the game where it could really turn on Sharon Moore if Michigan State wins, because then you're looking at 4-4 with Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Northwestern. That's not a winning season. They're not going to be favored against Oregon, Indiana, or Ohio State. So they could easily finish 5-7. The quarterback question is just shocking to me how bad the quarterback position has been for the Wolverines this year.
I was talking to Jim Nagy about that, who was the director of the Senior Bowl last week, and he kind of joked, and this was even before the game, that they're like, well, the quarterback situation, at these schools, some of them, they don't have a great one. He goes, how many of those teams do you think would have rather had Curtis Rourke? And how many of those other schools do you think Curtis Rourke would have went to before he got to Indiana on his list?
Yeah, I mean, Curtis Rourke at Michigan right now with the defense they have, I still don't think they have enough talent at receiver, but he would make them better. They would probably have beat Washington and beat Illinois and be, maybe 6-1 at this point. I don't know that they beat Texas. That's this game of portal roulette. Some teams hit, some teams don't, and some are right in the middle. Michigan didn't even go after it at all.
Yeah. Well, all right, we're going to take a quick break, get a couple more games, and then Bill has an unbelievable doomsday scenario in the Big Ten. I don't know how it works out, and it's funny because a scenario kind of similar to that, I believe, broke out in 2015. When people cheer for chaos, sometimes the chaos comes back and bites you. We'll talk about that here next on the Bobby Carpenter Show.
We were called soft last year. You don't want to be soft, especially when you come to the playoffs. So that's going to be a process throughout this season of establishing us as a harder team here in the.
I'm Garage Beer, and this is Bobby Carpenter.
Garage Beer. Beer-flavored beer.
Beef with an F? Okay, my bad. It's crisp and cool, and it doesn't taste like... I'm Bobby Carpenter. I drink in garages because my wife says I don't belong inside. If you like a cold breeze on your bag, drink garage beer. It's American, and so can you. Garage beer, beer-flavored beer.
I don't buy into this nonsense, this conspiracy nonsense that he's got his money and he's dogging it. That's ridiculous.
Welcome back in the show. Still here with Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Give him a follow on X at BillBender92. Always putting great stuff out there. We're going to get to his doomsday scenario here in a moment. But one team that we've kind of neglected, Bill, and it's amazing when you lose early, and especially when you don't look great in that loss, that we kind of cast you aside, especially if like they've got you right there on the edge and want to just push you over the top. And we love to see a dynasty fall. We love to see a dynasty rise. But Clemson, since the loss to Georgia, has looked much better on offense. Their defense has always been pretty good. 𝗟𝗓𝗩𝗘 looks more competent. They're running the football with Maffa better. Like this team, now maybe they're playing some ACC competition, but it seems like this is a team, despite that one early loss, that has a defense that could challenge Miami. And if Miami's defense is playing how they are, the Clemson might be able to put up 30 to 40 on them.
40 points every week since the Georgia game, at least 40 points. And 𝗟𝗓𝗩𝗘 has been fantastic. You know, he's found a rhythm with Garrett Riley. They run the ball, like you said. Their offense looks, at least on some level, like some of the old Clemson offenses. I don't know if there's enough talent at receiver. Like, we're not talking about like Hunter Renfrow and T. Higgins, but they are very good on that side of the ball. And the other thing, you might look at their scores and say, well, they're giving up a bunch of points. Well, a lot of those points against Clemson are coming in the fourth quarter when the game's already long been decided. So he's playing twos, and maybe their twos need a little work, but this is a very dangerous team with a very favorable schedule down the stretch. They don't play Miami in the regular season. The best case scenario for the ACC is Miami wins out, Clemson wins out, both teams play in the ACC championship. They might have a chance at 2 bids.
Well, if they both win out, SMU goes undefeated too. So I'm curious, since those teams don't play, I'm curious to see how that'll all shake, because SMU has the lone loss to BYU, which honestly looks pretty darn good right now, and they'll probably be ranked decently at that point as well. And I'm with you, Bill. Like, that's why you got to watch these games. And I've been watching the Clemson games the first half, third quarter, and I click them off, because after that, everything is kind of inconsequential. You know, you're getting garbage yards. They're putting up some points, but they're really dominating and starting fast. All right, now we've got this tweet that you put out here, the doomsday scenario for the Big Ten. And before we get to that, 2015, Bill, the year that Michigan State went to the CFP and Ohio State team didn't make it there, was the year that Ohio State lost to Michigan State. Not the biggest deal. They beat Michigan. And Michigan had Michigan State teed up and ready to beat them. And then we all laughed when they fumbled the punt and it's squirting around. They go down and score. Well, that made that, that eliminated the 3-way tie. Michigan State had the tiebreaker. They ended up going, as opposed to Ohio State, in a 3-way tie scenario between the three. And so this is another kind of doomsday-ish scenario for the Big Ten, assuming these teams take care of business. And then you kind of outline their biggest remaining game of how that ultimately looks to get, 5 teams, I believe, to 11-1?
5 teams at 11-1, 5 teams at 8-1. I'm distracted by that terrible avatar on my Twitter page, but we don't worry about that. I think so. I started to sketch out what would happen if we actually had this scenario where it really hinges on Illinois beating Oregon this weekend, which nobody thinks going to happen, but who knows with Brett Bielema? What if it does? Then you get to the end of the year, if all of these results happen, you'd have 5 teams at 11-1 and 8-1. This is a byproduct of not having divisions. If this happens, I think Ohio State's good, because the first tiebreaker is, how do these 5 teams do in head-to-head? Ohio State would be 2-1 in that instance. There would be 3 1-1 teams, and Indiana would be 0-1. The tiebreaker, I was just working on it before I came on. I have no idea if it would be Ohio State versus Oregon, Penn State, or Illinois. in the Big Ten championship game. I think it might be Illinois, because then you have to go through common opponents.
Yeah, Bill, we're
This
talking
is crazy.
we're talking like if you go read through it, like all of these conferences after like the third one, you're like, this is so arbitrary, and it depends on strength of your opponent's record, which I mean, you can't control who they're playing in the conference and how that works. And then, Bill, I think like the fifth or sixth tiebreaker, I believe in the Big Ten is some sort of like Star Trek or like Sport Track. There's some sort of rating system that I had never heard of that they're going to use to see who has the stronger, essentially scheduling or whatever it may be.
Right. And there's so many metrics that you go. I think the SEC actually has a coin toss once they get through so many. And obviously that spawns all the Friday Night Lights references from the truck stop, where make sure you have your lucky penny. But this is going to happen in every conference, by the way. We just talked about the Big 12 and the ACC. What if we have like a four-way tie where SMU and Pitt are involved? What about the Big 12 where BYU and Iowa State don't play? Kansas State has the one loss. Colorado could somehow finish 10-2. You have a mess there. The SEC already has 9 teams with 2 losses or more total. And then if you want to win some money, go outside and tell somebody, hey, the only 2 SEC unbeatens in conference play are LSU and Texas A&M, and they play this weekend. So there's plenty more chaos to come. You mentioned it. I'm not a fan of too much. I like a little bit of order in the standings and a little bit of have a team that might have an untouchable feel to them, but we don't have that this year.
Well, those games that you just mentioned going down this weekend, like one that's kind of surprising. I think Fick has a little bit of momentum. And again, I'm not saying like Northwestern is all this stuff, but defensively, they're playing a little bit better, right? Offensively, they are what they are, but they're at home. You got Penn State coming in off of a bye week, and then you got this Illinois-Oregon matchup in Oregon. Who do you expect that most likelihood to have that upset in these games?
Wisconsin will probably keep it closer than Illinois will on the road. Oregon's pretty solid. They were able to come across the country, beat Purdue. They're relying on the running game. Dylan Gabriel doesn't make a lot of mistakes, and I think they'll get after Illinois a little bit in that one. Opportunity for a signature game here for Wisconsin and Fick, like you mentioned. They're running the ball a little bit better. They're getting more out of the quarterback. Camp Randall at night, you guys know the story there. When it's right and when they're on, even last year against Ohio State, the Buckeyes had a tough first half because it was at night, and that can be one of those really difficult places to play. So we'll see if Drew Aller and Penn State, coming off a bye week, can go out there and do that. That would be the one better chance for an upset, even though I think Penn State will get out alive.
Looking at USC, and it's a team that I think everybody thought we'd be talking more about, especially after they beat LSU. And I mean, no one's probably more upset than Brian Kelly because they've got an anchor hanging around their neck with a loss to a team that should be good. I think we believe is talented, but they're 3-4. Wow. And Bill, I mean, they haven't lost to Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. I mean, they're losing to Minnesota and Maryland. And this is not a great Maryland team, mind you. This isn't one with, Tualea Tagovailoa that can sling the ball over the place. It seemed they always had trouble against Utah, and now they've kind of run into a conference of Utahs. And we talked about this prior, but I mean, if they go 7-5, I think that's almost a win at this point, given the rest of their schedule and how they've played. I know that, recruiting is an issue. They got D'Anton Lynn coming in as their coordinator, and they've looked better, but now it seems like this offense maybe isn't scoring, and they just seem to kind of be getting out tough. At what point would you be concerned if you're a Trojan faithful?
I think the Big Ten needs to make a T-shirt that says "a conference full of Utahs." You could trademark that right now, Bobby. That was awesome. Because you're right. They've really had a hard time with the transition in styles. I could make the argument that if USC was still in the old Pac-12, they'd probably be 6-1 or 5-2 right now. But these close losses to Minnesota, they should have beat Michigan, could have beat Maryland, and had Penn State down by 2 touchdowns after the first half. So it's not like they can't play with the Big Ten schools, but I think that style is starting to wear on them, and they have to be able to win these games. So I think they have to re-recruit their offensive and defensive lines and look at the style part of this, because that can still be an advantage to play at USC in the Coliseum with good quarterback play. I don't think Lincoln Riley is going to get fired, but they're definitely going to have to make the adjustment. One school that did that, BYU did that in the Big 12. Really struggled, look at them now. They've kind of got back to doing what they do, and it's working this season for them.
All right, so all of college football landscape, you got a really cool, interesting game. And I actually had this conversation last night at junior high football. Okay, not necessarily talking about the game, but just talking about the triple option. And you have number 12 going to number 24 Navy. Okay, what do you think is going to happen in this? Because my point was this: like, why doesn't a school in every major conference kind of run this? Because you got access to the best athletes. There's a lot of high schools that run the triple option. These guys who developed, Army and Navy sitting there undefeated. Okay, now you got Notre Dame coming in. Can Navy beat Notre Dame at home?
How about Blake Horvath, Central Ohio kid, doing a wonderful job running that triple option at Navy, because it's versatile in the fact that he's thrown touchdown passes too. It's not just running. He's been very efficient throwing the football. And yeah, I mean, as somebody who grew up in Central Ohio, I know there's plenty of teams that run that. They're quick football games. So the key for Navy, they've beat Notre Dame a few times in the last 10 meetings, but early, right? Like, Notre Dame's going to have to knock them out early, get ahead 10 to 14 points and go from there. And I'm not necessarily sure they're built to do that. Then you put it in New York at MetLife Stadium, you add another layer to this. This is Navy's best shot to do it. I do think Notre Dame wins the football game, but as you get into the third and fourth quarter, and the key for Army and Navy has been those quarterbacks have been masterful at running it. I think Army's a little bit better than Navy right now, but who am I to say that? They might get to figure that out in the American Athletic Conference Championship.
It's pretty wild because if you think about it too, Bill, like if you go watch a Notre Dame game, I mean, they're running a lot of single wing, like option principles with Lincoln Riley from the gun. This isn't a Notre Dame team that presses the ball down the field. They've been trying to run it 35 to 40 times and just throw some quick games. So this game might be over in like 3 hours and 15 minutes, 3 hours. They'll be jamming those commercials in the second half.
Yeah, and Riley Leonard, like you said, he's like one of those high school quarterbacks we all used to face where he was it. He's the guy running it. He's the guy throwing it. He's the one that Navy has to really stop and try to get a few turnovers. I can't wait to watch that game. I love it when the academy teams are playing well, and we're having that this year.
I mean, if we could somehow get an academy team, whether it's Army or Navy, into the playoff, that would be tremendous. They'd be playing essentially an exhibition at that point, the week after all the stuff is announced, which Schlegs can attest. How many Commanders and Chiefs trophies did you win, Schlegs?
I won both freshman and sophomore year.
I contend this, Bill, that winning the Commander-in-Chief trophy, if both of those teams are one loss or undefeated, would be more impactful for those gentlemen on the team than ever winning a playoff game, because people talked about them resting their starters should one of them already be in. Yeah,
they care about that more than anything. They'll be very upfront, and Schlegs knows that. That is the number one priority with those three schools, and I love everything about it.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. Sorry we kept you so long. A lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of chaos, and you had the tweet of the day. So we appreciate it, sir, and hopefully talk to you again next Tuesday.
We will. Thank you so much for having me on, guys. Have a great week.
You too, brother.
Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Give him a follow on X at BillBender92. Does such a tremendous and fantastic job there. And actually gave us the nugget of the day. All right, coming up next, we got our headlines. Get a little into some more USC news and Lincoln Riley, maybe what USC actually is. You got a great name for it. To find out next here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Bobby Carpenter. I want to give a huge thank you and a shout out to Affinity Whole Health, the leaders in the testosterone replacement industry. I've been on a testosterone replacement program for a few years right now, and I've got to tell you, it's been an absolute game changer. Affinity Whole Health has allowed me to be the best version of myself, both mentally and physically. I loved how easy it was to get started. I booked my free consultation, met with my prescriber, checked my numbers, and Affinity Whole Health designed a program that was customized to fit my needs. So I'm telling you guys, if you have low energy, you want to get rid of that spare tire around the waist or take it to the next level in the bedroom, Affinity Whole Health is the place to get started. So don't wait any longer. 5 minutes of your time, book your free consultation. You're going to love the way you feel. All right, Schlegs, I want to tell you about my friends over at Affinity Whole Health. Listen, they've got all kinds of things that they can do for you. They do a great job. I've been a patient there for 7 years. They're experts in semaglutide health for weight loss and testosterone replacement therapy to help you feel good, more energy, increase muscle, lose weight, and keep it off with the semaglutide. It's quick and easy to get started. It's 2-day delivery. So what you do, folks, go to affinityWholeHealth.com. You register for your free consultation. You go in there, they do a full workup on you. They figure out what you need, figure out your goals, what you want to accomplish. They deliver right to your door. No need to go in office for treatments. They're local. They're right to your doorstep. It's easy for you. Go check them out. Like I said, I've been a patient there for 7 years, maybe 8 now. I'll have to go back and count. It's been so long, but it's easy. It's affinityWholeHealth.com. Check them out. Tell them I sent you and get started for today. And don't wait till 2025. Start the new year on a roll. All right, Schlegs, we got our headlines. And, you know, USC is playing a whole conference full of Utahs. Maybe not a whole conference. Ohio State can kind of high fly a little bit, but they want to run the ball. Michigan wants to run the ball. Iowa wants to run the ball. Minnesota wants to run. Everybody in the Big Ten, they may throw it some, but they really want to run the football and be tough and physical up front. USC came in here and thought they were going to maybe dominate, high fly, throw the football around, you know, Schlegs, dance around, fool you with trickery, and score a lot of points and touchdowns. Quit knocking your light down over there. Let's get it together. But really, let's throw that up there, Pat. What USC has really become, I mean, they're Beach Purdue. I mean, I can't take credit for this. I wish I could. But they're 3-4. They're losing to Maryland. They're losing to Minnesota and getting big boyed on the goal line. They lost to Michigan. No shame in that. This isn't a great Michigan team. And Michigan just basically said, we're going to run it until you don't want to tackle us anymore. And that's kind of where they've landed.
Bumpy, to say the least. And then everybody's talking about like Lincoln Riley, and he has like a $60 to $80 million buyout. Somebody's going to have to cash that check. But how they go about doing things offensively and defensively are going to have to change when you are in a conference like the Big Ten. Texas saw it against Georgia. I think they can make the adjustment because of the talent that they have. But when your talent is predominantly in your skill positions, hard to win the line of scrimmage, hard to be physical up front when you're facing the kind of teams in the Big Ten that are winning the way that they're winning, and that's through running the football. We see Indiana, they're able to throw it, but they just had 200-plus yards on the ground this last week. They're running it very, very effectively. That's what you have to be able to do to be effective in this conference. You have to be able to stop the run.
Well, run the ball, stop the run, affect the quarterback strikes. And Lincoln Riley, big brain. He wears a visor because he's a big brain visor guy. He needs to make sure he has plenty of room for that thing to grow up top. All right, and we'll flip to this as you brought up Indiana. The new world, Schlegs. This is what we're living in college football now in 2024. The new age, the new world, something I didn't think I'd ever see happen, to where Indiana, you start looking at them at the standings, where they're at, where some of the other teams are at, right around them. And we can toss this up here, Pat, where Indiana's ranked ahead of Alabama. I don't know if I'm surprised that the sun has come up right now, Schlegs, but holy smokes, that is something that is incredibly rare. And Indiana's got, if they, we'll see, if Taven can keep playing the way that Curtis Rourke did, but if they can get good quarterback play, I think they can finish as a 1, possibly 2-loss team, and that would be great. All right, we don't have much time left because we want to get to some tailgate talk. Brought to you by our friends over at RealTruck. Talking about getting after the quarterback, Schlegs. It's been the talk of message boards everywhere, our comments section. We're going to talk about that next here on the Bobby Carpenter Show.
We were called soft last year. You don't want to be soft, especially when you come to the playoffs. So that's going to be a process throughout this season of establishing us as a harder team here in the
building a home for the people who are worth it. Stepping out, throwing in a line, and dropping the tailgate for a picnic. And finding far-off campsites with the people you're closest to. Upgrade your truck, Jeep, or Bronco with over 1 million parts and accessories. And bring your truck to life. RealTruck.
I I don't buy into this nonsense, this conspiracy nonsense that he's got his money and he's dogging it. That's ridiculous.
All right, now we're going to tailgate talk. We answer your questions, the stuff that's burning out there. It's brought to you by our friends at RealTruck. I want to share an offer that they've got out there for you. You go to RealTruck.com. You're going to be able to outfit your Jeep, your truck, your Bronco, make it sweet, interior features, exterior features. It's going to be absolutely tremendous. And RealTruck's going to throw in a gift for you this holiday season. You purchase $100 or more, you're going to get a free RealTruck hat. Use promo code Bobby at checkout. You do that, you get some sweet gear from RealTruck. We got some shirts, we got some hats, and our trucks and my Jeep all outfitted with tons of RealTruck gear. So go check them out. That's RealTruck.com. $100 or more. Bobby at checkout and get your free hat with that. All right, Schlegs. Everybody's been talking about now ad nauseum, not getting pressure on the quarterback. You look in fourth quarters. Offense has kind of struggled some, hasn't scored as much as they'd like to. Defensively, giving up a lot of points in the fourth quarter in big games, these matchup games over the last couple of years. Not getting pressure on the quarterback. We saw that they saw that Georgia-Texas game and how that looked far different than Oregon-Ohio State. Kind of your thoughts on mixing up that pressure and what it ultimately can do.
Yeah, my thoughts are this, like something has to be addressed. Now, I will say, remember last year we only had 23 sacks. This year we have 17. We're only 6 away from that production.
We're top 25 in sacks this year. We're not far off.
No, and so you got, what do you got? You got 6 games remaining to go make an adjustment. And that's, again, I go back and not every team is perfect. They're going to have things that they struggle with. The thing that coming into the season that everybody was most concerned about was the offensive line. I thought the offensive line has done a really good job this year. We're going to see how that looks, having lost Josh, a.k.a. Jimmy, at the left tackle position, and where do we go from there? Looking at the guard position. But that being said, we have to be able to affect the quarterback. How can you do that? Well, you could add in a blitzer from a linebacker spot that spies the quarterback. You could bring zone pressure, which we ran a lot of, Bobby, back when we played. I mean, predominantly we ran a nickel package our senior year, and we blitzed a ton and played man within a zone, fire zone pressure, 3 under 3 deep a lot. And it was very successful. But the number one thing is affect that man while also being able to stop the run. In the games where they're like, oh, are they going to be able to handle Iowa running the football? We handled it. Guy had 19 yards in the first half. The thing came when now you go to Oregon. And were they able to run it? Yeah, not necessarily effectively as they always have, but they were able to do so and with some quick hitters. But it was when we just sat back and played zone against an elite quarterback, even though you drop 9 sometimes, he was able to find the void because he had nobody in his face. And that's how you got to affect him to make a quick decision, and it helps your back end when you do so.
So he's comfortable. I got a little nugget for you, Schlegs. Jim Knowles last year at Oklahoma State, they had over 50 sacks. I think it was 53. I started adding them up. I mean, they were well over 45. It was into the low 50s. And so he's brought pressure. He used to run, his little Jack Okie package. And so one of the things, like, they've run a lot of 4 down, as everybody can see. Not a lot of second level pressure, but not a lot of twists and stunts up front. You can start by running some twists and stunts up front. Maybe you can go, they run even where it's 4 down. You go some odd where you go 3 down. Stand a defensive end up. Maybe you can bring an extra linebacker. And these packages aren't all that complicated. You only need a couple blitzes out of each one from either side. Marry some coverage to them with the back. And what that does, Schlegs, I'll compare it to this because your son's a baseball guy. In the fourth quarter, when they've seen all your coverages and they're not really under pressure, it's like going through that pitcher the second and then the third time to where you feel good about everything. You kind of see it no matter what they're doing on the back end. You feel good about it. You haven't been hit and you've been able to identify it. And now you feel like you can maybe attack it a little more, hang on, hold on to the ball and push it down the field because you're not getting that heat. So I think going to a little bit of odd, maybe changing up personnel a little bit. You got Caleb Downs, who's a heck of a blitzer that you can bring in there too. And by doing that, you may give up a play here and there. But it's like you don't. And I think Jim Knowles, I think they were burned a little bit from that Peach Bowl Schlegs, where like you're bringing pressure, and then all of a sudden, you get the home run over the top. You don't have to do it when you're up by 10. And you can have your guys play off, but pressure, just varying what you do, not just the coverages in the back end, which they do a great job of, but varying those looks up front to confuse the offensive linemen. You have versatile pieces, get them walking back and forth, and I think that will be great. All right. Got a little Halloween action for you next. Take a look at what Schlegs, myself, maybe even AJ, will break it down here next. All right, welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. This past weekend, AJ had his big event. We talked a little bit about it earlier. Usually does it in the summer. Promotes his foundation over at the James Hospital on OSU and James Cancer Center, and then also through the Buckeye Cruise. And so, Lisa and Chris do a fantastic job of putting together this unbelievable event. Raised a ton of money, and since it was Halloween this year, you know what? Got some great costumes, and so we'll throw some of the great stuff up there. Schlegs, of all the beautiful things that are involved. Okay, we got my guy, AJ Beetlejuice, on the far right. His brother, as we look at it to the right, he was Maverick, the newer one. I'm more old school Maverick, yes, with the dyed hair. My man, Doug Daddish, looking like Benedict Arnold from back in the day.
George Washington.
We'll go with that because that's a way better look. And then cousin Eddie Schlegel sitting there on the left side. That's all your original gear too, Schlegs. I mean, you're looking solid.
Yeah, AJ said, like, just be yourself. So I was like, okay, yeah, I got this. I got the braided horse belt on. I got my Rocky SV2 boots on, which, like, those are, if the shitter was full at the farm, that's what I would be wearing there. So why not just go as yourself, a.k.a. Cousin Eddie from National
Absolutely.
Anthem.
It was a good time. My lovely wife, Courtney, went as Charlie. Like I said, we went from the old school, the 86. Tried to get her to go as Penny Benjamin Schlegel. She wasn't having it. She said she didn't have any distinguishing characteristics. But there's our guy, Mike Nugent, too. Didn't make the first picture, but I mean, I was kind of worried about him because he was full in character as Joker, and I wanted to make sure he was waking up that next day. But an awesome time, fun time. We'll have our guy AJ on tomorrow, talk a little bit more about that. And there's the lovely Courtney Carpenter sitting there in the middle, a.k.a. call sign Schlegs. Charlie, that's it for today's show. Stay locked on. We got a big show tomorrow with our guy AJ and talk a little RealTruck as well as we get you ready for Nebraska. See you live at 12:30 tomorrow.